There's a diagram they don't want you to see. An ancient map that's been hidden in plain sight for thousands of years, buried in forgotten texts, disguised in religious symbolism, scattered across mystery schools from Egypt to Tibet. This diagram shows you exactly where you are right now. And I'm not talking about your physical location. I'm talking about your consciousness, your awareness, your true self. See, you've been living in what the ancients called the lower self your entire life. And you didn't choose this. From the moment you were born, they've been programming you to stay there, stuck, trapped in survival mode, reactive emotions, and endless cycles of fear, desire, and suffering. The lower self isn't who you really are. It's a cage, a prison constructed by thousands of years of conditioning, designed to keep you small, predictable, and easy to control. But here's what they don't want you to know. There's another you, a higher self, a version of you that exists beyond fear, beyond ego, beyond the limitations they've convinced you are permanent. This higher self isn't some mystical fantasy. It's real. It's accessible. And in the next hour, I'm going to show you the exact ancient diagram that maps the journey from where you are now to who you're meant to be. This isn't theory. This isn't philosophy. By the end of this video, you'll have the actual techniques, some of them thousands of years old, some backed by cutting-edge neuroscience, to start connecting to your higher self tonight. Not next month, not after years of meditation. Tonight. The stakes couldn't be higher. Every day you spend trapped in the lower self is a day you're not living your real life. It's a day you're operating at a fraction of your true power. And they're counting on you never figuring this out. Before we go any further, I need you to understand something critical. This information has been systematically hidden from you. Not by accident, not because it's complicated, but because when you connect to your higher self, you become ungovernable. You stop being predictable. You stop consuming mindlessly. You stop accepting the script they've written for your life. Think about your life right now. How much of your day is spent in worry, in regret about the past, or anxiety about the future? How often do you feel truly present, truly alive, truly connected to something bigger than your immediate problems? If you're honest with yourself, it's rare. Maybe it's never. That's not your fault. That's the lower self doing exactly what it was designed to do. Keep you locked in survival mode, chasing the next dopamine hit, the next validation, the next temporary relief from the constant undercurrent of dissatisfaction. The ancient mystery schools knew this. The Egyptian priests, the Tibetan monks, the Greek philosophers, the Hermetic masters, they all mapped the same journey. They created diagrams, symbols, practices to guide people from the lower self to the higher self. And these diagrams weren't just spiritual art. They were precise maps, instruction manuals for consciousness itself. What I'm about to show you is a synthesis of these ancient systems, combined with modern neuroscience and personal transformation techniques that actually work. No fluff, no mystical jargon you can't apply. Just the real method for ascending from the lower self to the higher self, step by step, starting tonight. Let's start with where you are right now. The lower self. The ancients had many names for it. The animal soul, the reactive mind, the ego, the shadow self. But here's what it actually is, stripped of all the mystical language. It's the part of your consciousness that operates on autopilot, driven by survival instincts, conditioned responses, and external validation. Think of your brain as having different levels. At the base, you have the reptilian brain, pure survival, fight, flight, freeze, food, reproduction. Above that, the mammalian brain, emotions, social bonding, fear, desire. And at the top, the neocortex, reasoning, creativity, abstract thought. The lower self lives primarily in those first two layers. It's constantly scanning for threats. It's obsessed with status, with fitting in, with accumulating resources. It experiences emotions as overwhelming forces that control behavior. Here's the critical part they don't teach you. Modern society is specifically designed to keep you locked in the lower self. Every system, every institution, every form of media is engineered to trigger those lower brain functions. Fear-based news keeps your reptilian brain activated. Social media hijacks your mammalian need for belonging and status. Consumer culture preys on your lower self's insecurity and desire for validation through possessions. Let me give you a real example. Think about the last time you scrolled through social media. Notice what happened to your nervous system. You weren't just passively looking at images. Your body was responding. Micro hits of cortisol when you saw someone doing better than you. Tiny dopamine spikes when you got a like. Activation of your threat detection system when you encountered opinions that challenged your worldview. That's your lower self in action. Reactive, compulsive, controlled by external stimuli. The ancient diagram I'm going to show you maps this precisely. At the bottom of the diagram, you see the lower self represented as a figure trapped in matter, surrounded by the symbols of the elements, earth, water, fire, air. These aren't just poetic metaphors, they represent the forces that dominate the lower self's experience. Earth represents being trapped in material concerns, physical survival, accumulation of possessions. When you're stuck here, your entire focus is on security, money, status symbols, physical comfort. You can't see beyond the next paycheck, the next purchase, the next meal. Your consciousness is literally weighed down by matter. Water represents being swept away by emotions, drowning in feelings, unable to observe them without being consumed. How many decisions have you made from anger, jealousy, fear, lust? When you're dominated by the water element, emotions aren't signals, they're tsunamis that take over your entire being. Fire represents uncontrolled desire, burning ambition, aggressive will, consuming passion. It's that restless energy that never lets you rest, always pushing you to want more, achieve more, conquer more. Fire in the lower self becomes destructive, burning through your life force without ever finding satisfaction. Air represents scattered thoughts, mental chaos, the endless internal monologue, racing mind, inability to focus. It's waking up at 3 a.m. with your thoughts spinning. It's sitting in a meeting, but your mind is somewhere else. It's never being fully present because you're always thinking about something else. The lower self is trapped in these elements. You're not controlling them, they're controlling you. And here's the thing, this isn't a moral failing, this is conditioning. From childhood, you were programmed to operate primarily from the lower self. Think about school. Were you taught to question authority or to obey it? Were you rewarded for creative thinking or for following instructions? Were you encouraged to develop your intuition or to trust only what could be measured and tested? The entire education system is designed to strengthen the lower self and atrophy the higher self. Then you enter the workforce. What gets rewarded? Competition, compliance, consumption, keeping your head down, trading your time for money, sacrificing your present for a future that keeps receding. The system doesn't want you connected to your higher self because the higher self asks dangerous questions like, is this really how I want to spend my finite time on earth? Is external validation worth the cost to my soul? What if there's a completely different way to live? And it gets worse. Modern society has weaponized your lower self against you. They've created an entire economy based on keeping you trapped there. Pharmaceutical companies profit from your anxiety and depression, symptoms of a consciousness trapped in the lower self. Social media platforms have perfected the science of hijacking your reward circuits. News media keeps you addicted to fear and outrage. Marketing convinces you that happiness is one purchase away, while ensuring you never actually feel satisfied. The lower self is constantly engaged in comparison. Am I as successful as them? Am I as attractive, as wealthy, as respected? This comparison is suffering. It's a bottomless pit because there will always be someone with more, someone doing better, someone who seems happier. The lower self can never rest in this environment. It's always striving, always inadequate, always one step behind. And here's the most insidious part. The lower self thinks it's protecting you. When you try to make a change, to step into something new, to access your higher self, the lower self screams in protest. It creates fear. It reminds you of every past failure. It tells you you're not ready, not worthy, not capable. It says, stay small, stay safe, don't risk it. This is the prison, the trap, the cage. And the lock on that cage is your belief that this is all you are. That these reactive emotions, these fear-based decisions, these status-seeking behaviors, this constant dissatisfaction, that this is just human nature. It's not. It's the lower self, and you've been conditioned to think it's the only self. But the ancient masters knew better. They mapped the way out. And that map has been preserved in symbols, in diagrams, in practices that work regardless of whether you believe in them. The diagram shows the path from the lower self at the bottom to the higher self at the top. And between them, the journey, the transformation, the death of who you thought you were, and the birth of who you actually are. Now let's look at the actual diagram. This synthesis comes from multiple ancient traditions: the Egyptian judgment of the soul, the Kabbalistic tree of life, the Hermetic principles, the chakra system, Plato's allegory of the cave. They're all describing the same map, the same journey from lower self to higher self. At the bottom, you have the lower self, trapped in the four elements I just described. Dominated by survival instinct, reactive emotion, scattered thought, and material obsession. This is where most people spend their entire lives. Not because they're stupid or weak, but because they don't know there's another level. In the middle of the diagram, you see what the ancients called the abyss, or the dark night of the soul, or the dweller on the threshold. This is the transition phase. This is where you have to die to your old identity, where everything you thought you knew about yourself gets stripped away, where you face your shadow, your fear, your ego's desperate attempt to maintain control. Most people hit this phase and turn back. The discomfort is too intense. The uncertainty is too overwhelming. They retreat to the familiar suffering of the lower self. But if you cross the abyss, if you're willing to let the old you die, you reach the realm of the higher self. At the top of the diagram, you see a figure radiating light, connected to the cosmos, standing between the pillars of duality, having integrated all the elements rather than being controlled by them. This is your higher self. This is who you actually are beneath all the conditioning. The higher self operates from a completely different level of consciousness. Instead of being trapped in the reptilian and mammalian brain, the higher self accesses the prefrontal cortex, the pineal gland, what some neuroscientists call the seat of consciousness, and what ancient traditions called the third eye. This isn't mystical nonsense. This is neurobiology. When you're operating from the higher self, you're not reactive, you're responsive. You observe emotions without being swept away by them. You experience thoughts without believing you are your thoughts. You're not driven by external validation because you're connected to something deeper, something that doesn't need the world's approval to know its worth. The higher self sees patterns the lower self cannot see. It operates with intuition that feels like magic, but is actually your brain processing vast amounts of information beyond conscious awareness. It makes decisions from wisdom rather than fear. It creates from inspiration rather than desperation. It connects to purpose rather than just pursuing pleasure and avoiding pain. Here's what the diagram reveals about the higher self's relationship to the elements. Earth becomes grounding, not trapping. You're present in your body, rooted, stable, but not weighed down by material obsession. You can enjoy physical reality without being enslaved to it. Water becomes emotional intelligence, not emotional chaos. You feel deeply, but you're not drowned by feelings. Emotions become information, signals, energy to be channeled, rather than tsunamis that destroy everything in their path. Fire becomes controlled will, creative power, directed passion. Instead of burning chaotically, fire becomes the focused flame that transforms, that creates, that illuminates. It's the difference between a wildfire and a forge. Air becomes clear thought, focused mind, penetrating insight. Instead of scattered mental chaos, you have clarity, concentration, the ability to direct your attention rather than having it hijacked by every passing stimulus. The diagram shows that the higher self has integrated these elements. It's not trying to escape the body, reject emotions, kill desire, or stop thinking. It's mastering them, becoming the conductor rather than the instrument. Ancient texts describe the higher self with terms like the Christ consciousness, Buddha nature, Atman, the divine spark, the immortal self. Strip away the religious language, and what are they actually describing? They're describing you when you're not operating from fear, ego, and conditioning. They're describing you when you're aligned with your deepest truth. Neuroscience is now confirming what the ancients knew. Studies on meditation, flow states, psychedelic experiences, near-death experiences, they all point to the same thing. There's a level of consciousness beyond the default mode network, the lower self's constant mental chatter. When people access this state, they describe it remarkably consistently: a sense of connection, clarity, purpose, peace, creativity, love without object, awareness without anxiety. The diagram shows 7 major levels between the lower self and higher self, corresponding to the 7 chakras, the 7 planets of ancient astronomy, the 7 liberal arts, the 7 stages of alchemical transformation. But we can simplify this. There are 3 critical thresholds you must cross. First threshold: awareness. You must wake up to the fact that you're operating from the lower self. You must observe your reactive patterns, your conditioned responses, your ego's strategies. This is the hardest step for most people because the lower self resists observation. It wants to stay invisible, automatic, in control. Second threshold: the abyss. You must be willing to let your old identity die, to face the fear, the uncertainty, the void where all your familiar coping mechanisms don't work anymore. You must sit with the discomfort of not knowing who you are when you're not the character you've been playing your whole life. Third threshold: integration. You must stabilize in the higher self, make it your default rather than a peak experience. This requires consistent practice, ongoing vigilance, continuous choosing of the higher self over the lower self's pullback to familiarity. The ancient diagram isn't just a map, it's an activation code. When you truly see it, when you understand where you are and where you can go, something shifts. A part of you remembers. The higher self has been there all along, buried under layers of conditioning, waiting for you to remember what you forgot when you were taught to be small. Now, I know some of you are thinking, this sounds great, but how do I actually do this? How do I cross these thresholds? How do I access my higher self tonight, not 10 years from now after I've meditated for 10,000 hours? That's exactly what I'm going to show you next. The ancient diagram came with practices, techniques, methods that work whether you believe in them or not, because they're based on how consciousness actually functions. These aren't secrets anymore. This knowledge has been reconstructed, tested, refined. And I'm going to give you the most powerful techniques right now. Here's the truth they don't want you to know. Accessing your higher self isn't difficult. It's been made to seem difficult, complicated, reserved for monks, mystics, and enlightened masters. But that's a lie designed to keep you from your power. The techniques I'm about to share have been tested for thousands of years. They work on the mechanics of consciousness. They're not beliefs, they're technologies. And you can start using them tonight, in your own home, without any special equipment, training, or guru. Technique 1. The sacred pause, breaking the reactive loop. The lower self operates on autopilot. Stimulus to reaction, trigger to response. Someone cuts you off in traffic to anger. You see your bank balance to anxiety. You get criticized to defensiveness. The reaction is instant, automatic, and it reinforces the neural pathways that keep you trapped in the lower self. The first technique is deceptively simple. Create a pause between stimulus and response, just 3 seconds. That's it. When something triggers you, instead of reacting immediately, pause, breathe, observe what's arising in you. Here's how to do it tonight. Pick one recurring trigger in your life. Maybe it's your phone notifications. Maybe it's a particular person. Maybe it's checking your email. For the next 24 hours, every time that trigger appears, pause for 3 conscious breaths before responding. What happens in that pause is revolutionary. Your prefrontal cortex comes online. Your higher self gets a chance to observe the lower self's automatic programming. You create a gap where choice becomes possible. Ancient texts called this the space between thoughts, or the gap in the breath, or standing at the threshold. Modern neuroscience calls it activating the executive function or engaging metacognition. Same thing. You're interrupting the autopilot. You're creating the condition for higher self to emerge. Do this consistently for 3 days, and you'll notice something incredible. The reactive patterns that seem to define your personality aren't you. They're just habits, programs, and programs can be rewritten. Technique 2. The witness practice, observing without identifying. The lower self is completely identified with its thoughts and emotions. When you think, "I'm not good enough," the lower self believes that thought is truth. When you feel anxiety, the lower self becomes anxiety. There's no separation, no space, no perspective. The higher self can observe thoughts and emotions without being them. This is the foundation of every ancient contemplative practice, from Buddhism to Stoicism to Christian mysticism. The technique is this. For 5 minutes today, sit quietly and watch your thoughts like you're watching clouds pass through the sky. Don't try to control them. Don't judge them as good or bad. Just notice them. There's a thought about what I need to do tomorrow. There's a feeling of tension in my chest. There's a memory from yesterday. There's a judgment about this practice. The critical instruction: add "I notice" before every observation. Not "I'm anxious," but "I notice anxiety arising." Not "I'm a failure," but "I notice the thought I'm a failure" appearing in my awareness. This tiny linguistic shift creates a massive change in consciousness. It separates the observer, higher self, from the observed, lower self's content. You are not your thoughts. You are the awareness in which thoughts appear. Do this for 5 minutes tonight before bed. Set a timer. Sit comfortably. Close your eyes and just watch. Notice, observe. The first few times, you'll probably get lost in thoughts constantly. That's normal. The lower self will try to reassert control. Just gently come back to observing. No judgment, no frustration, just witness. Ancient traditions said if you can master this one practice, you can access your higher self at will. Because once you know experientially that you're not your thoughts, the tyranny of the mind ends. You're free. Technique 3. The heart coherence method, accessing higher self through the body. Here's something the ancient diagram shows that modern culture has completely forgotten. The heart is not just a pump. Ancient Egyptians believed consciousness resided in the heart. Hermetic texts describe the heart as the bridge between lower self and higher self. Chinese medicine maps the heart as the emperor of consciousness. They weren't being poetic. The heart has its own neural network, about 40,000 neurons. It sends more signals to the brain than the brain sends to it. When your heart rhythm is chaotic, which happens when you're in lower self states like stress, fear, anger, your brain can't function optimally. But when your heart rhythm becomes coherent, smooth, stable, ordered, your brain enters a state that dramatically increases intuition, creativity, and connection to higher self. This is measurable. The HeartMath Institute has done decades of research on this. Heart coherence creates physiological conditions that make higher self states accessible. Here's the technique for tonight. Sit comfortably. Place your hand on your heart. Breathe slowly, 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out. As you breathe, imagine breathing directly into your heart. Then bring to mind something or someone you genuinely appreciate. Not fake gratitude, real appreciation. A person you love, a moment of beauty you experienced, something that naturally makes you feel warmth. Hold that feeling of appreciation while you continue breathing into your heart for 3 to 5 minutes. What's happening physiologically? You're shifting from sympathetic, stress, to parasympathetic, rest, nervous system dominance. You're creating heart coherence. You're activating the vagus nerve. You're producing DHEA instead of cortisol. And in this state, your prefrontal cortex, your higher self, comes fully online. Do this practice once today, then once tomorrow. Then notice how different you feel making decisions from this state versus from the scattered, stressed, reactive state of the lower self. You'll make different choices, better choices, choices aligned with your actual values rather than your conditioned fears. Technique 4. The death meditation, crossing the abyss. The ancient diagram shows the abyss, the death of the lower self-identity. Most people avoid this at all costs. They'll do anything to avoid facing mortality, impermanence, the dissolution of ego. But the masters knew you must die before you die. This is a simple but powerful practice that creates rapid access to higher self by forcing a perspective shift that obliterates the lower self's petty concerns. Here's how. Tonight, before you go to sleep, lie in bed and imagine you just received news that you have 1 week to live. Not morbid imagination, clear, honest contemplation. 1 week left. 7 days. Now ask yourself, what would actually matter? What would you do with that time? Who would you contact? What would you say? What would you finally stop worrying about? What would you realize was always a distraction? Write down what comes up. Be honest. This isn't about what you should say. It's about what your higher self actually values when the lower self's endless future planning and past ruminating gets obliterated by the reality of limited time. Then ask, if this is what actually matters, why am I not living that way now? Why am I spending my precious finite life force on things that wouldn't matter at all if I only had a week left? This practice is brutal. It strips away pretense. It dissolves the ego's games. It reveals what the higher self has always known. Most of what you worry about is meaningless. Most of what you chase is empty. And you've been given this incredible gift of consciousness, and you're wasting it trying to impress people you don't even like. The ancient mystery schools used versions of this practice. Egyptians meditated on the judgment of the soul. Buddhist monks contemplated corpses. Stoics practiced negative visualization and memento mori. They knew, facing death awakens you to life. Do this once, honestly, and watch how your priorities shift immediately. Technique 5. The invocation, calling the higher self. Forward. Every ancient tradition had invocation practices, prayers, mantras, affirmations that called forth the higher self. But here's what most people don't understand. These aren't magical spells that manipulate external forces. They're neurological reprogramming tools that shift your identity. Your brain doesn't distinguish between vividly imagined experience and actual experience. When you repeatedly declare something with conviction, your nervous system starts organizing around that declaration. Neural pathways form, behavior patterns change, identity shifts. Here's your invocation for tonight. Stand in front of a mirror, look yourself in the eyes, and declare out loud, with conviction, these words. I am not the voice of fear in my head. I am not my past. I am not my conditioning. I am the awareness that observes all of this. I am the higher self that has always existed beneath the noise. I am connected to infinite intelligence. I am worthy. I am powerful. I am here. Yes, it will feel awkward. The lower self will resist. It will tell you this is stupid, embarrassing, fake. That's the point. The lower self's resistance is proof you're doing something that threatens its control. Say it anyway. Say it like you mean it. Say it until something shifts. The ancient mystery schools had initiates repeat declarations like this hundreds of times because they understood your identity is not fixed. It's constructed through repeated thought patterns and declarations. Change the declaration, change the identity. Modern psychology calls this cognitive restructuring or neuroplasticity training. The ancients called it speaking things into being or the word made flesh. Same mechanism. Your nervous system responds to conviction, repetition, and emotional charge. Do this invocation every morning for 7 days. Watch what happens. Technique 6. The purification fast, resetting the system. The ancient diagram shows purification as essential for accessing higher self. Every mystery school, every spiritual tradition, every consciousness practice includes some form of fasting or dietary restriction. Here's why. Your gut is called the second brain for a reason. It produces 90% of your serotonin. It's connected directly to your brain through the vagus nerve. And when your digestive system is constantly processing heavy food, your consciousness gets weighed down in matter, literally. The ancient Egyptians fasted before temple rituals. Jesus fasted for 40 days before his ministry. Buddha fasted before enlightenment. Yogis prescribe fasting for spiritual advancement. They knew, when you stop putting so much energy into digestion, that energy becomes available for higher consciousness functions. Here's the beginner-friendly version for tonight. Try a 16-hour fast. Stop eating after dinner today. Don't eat again until lunch tomorrow. Just water, black coffee, or tea, if needed. That's it. During that fasting window, notice what happens. The urge to eat is often not hunger. It's the lower self seeking comfort, distraction, stimulation. When you don't immediately satisfy that urge, you create space. Clarity. Energy that usually goes to digestion becomes available for focus, intuition, insight. Advanced version. Once a week, do a 24-hour water fast. The mental clarity that emerges after hour 18 is remarkable. Ancient texts describe fasting as burning away the dross or purifying the vessel. What they meant, you're giving your system a break from constant consumption, so higher self can emerge from under the weight of matter. Technique 7. The third eye activation, opening higher perception. The ancient diagram shows the third eye at the crown of the higher self figure, the pineal gland, the seat of higher perception, what Descartes called the seat of the soul. Every ancient tradition has practices for activating this. Modern neuroscience has discovered something fascinating. The pineal gland produces DMT, the same compound in ayahuasca and psilocybin that creates mystical states. It's also extremely sensitive to light exposure and electromagnetic fields. The ancients didn't know about DMT, but they knew practices that activated the pineal gland and created expanded states of consciousness. Here's a simple technique for tonight. Sit in complete darkness. Cover your eyes with your palms, no light at all. Focus your attention on the space between your eyebrows, the third eye point. Breathe slowly. Imagine an indigo or violet light beginning to glow in that space. Hold this focus for 11 minutes. Ancient texts were specific about this time frame. You might see patterns, colors, lights. You might feel pressure or tingling. You might experience nothing at first. Doesn't matter. You're activating dormant neural pathways. You're training your attention on the higher self's seat of consciousness. Combine this with eliminate blue light 2 hours before bed. Your pineal gland needs darkness to produce melatonin and DMT. Consider sleeping in complete darkness. Get morning sunlight exposure. The pineal gland needs the natural light-dark cycle to function optimally. Ancient practices for third eye activation included meditation on the point between the eyebrows, chanting specific frequencies, darkness retreats, specific breathing patterns, alternate nostril breathing, visualization of light at the crown. These aren't superstitions, they're consciousness technologies based on neurological realities the ancients understood experientially and were now confirming scientifically. Technique 8. The energy transmutation practice, from lower to higher. The ancient diagram shows energy moving from the base, lower self, to the crown, higher self. This is the same map as the chakra system, the Hermetic principle of as above, so below. The alchemical transformation of lead into gold. What does this actually mean, stripped of mysticism? It means your base energies, sexual energy, survival fear, aggressive will, can be transmuted into higher consciousness. The energy doesn't change. What changes is how it's directed. When you feel strong emotion, anger, lust, fear, you have two choices. 1. React from the lower self. Lash out, seek immediate gratification, avoid and suppress. 2. Transmute from the higher self. Observe the energy. Redirect it into creative expression, purposeful action, or consciousness expansion. Here's tonight's practice. The next time you feel intense emotion, any emotion, don't react immediately. Instead, close your eyes. Feel where that emotion lives in your body. Chest, gut, throat. Now breathe into that sensation. Imagine breathing the energy up your spine, from the base to the crown of your head. With each breath, the energy rises, transforms, becomes lighter. This is what tantric practices, Kundalini yoga, and Taoist inner alchemy were doing, transmuting base energy into spiritual energy, sexual energy into creative power, fear into heightened alertness and presence, anger into determined action for justice. The lower self wastes energy on reactions, addictions, distractions. The higher self harnesses that same energy and directs it toward creation, consciousness, contribution. Technique 9. The connection practice beyond the illusion of separation. The lower self experiences itself as separate, isolated, alone. The higher self knows it's connected to everything. This isn't a belief system. It's a direct experience you can access through specific practices. Here's the simplest one for tonight. Sit outside under the sky. Day or night doesn't matter. Look up. Feel yourself as part of the cosmos, not separate from it. Your body is made of the same elements as the stars. The iron in your blood was forged in a supernova billions of years ago. You are literally stardust that became conscious. Hold this awareness for 10 minutes. When the lower self's thoughts intrude, I have so much to do. This is pointless. I'm wasting time. Just come back to the direct experience of connection. Ancient practices that created this same consciousness, nature immersion, sitting with trees, water, earth. Contemplating the vastness of space, recognizing the intelligence in all living things. Practicing compassion as connection recognition. Modern neuroscience shows when people have experiences of connection and unity, their default mode network, the ego/lower self, decreases activity while areas associated with expanded awareness increase. This is measurable, repeatable, trainable. Technique 10. The daily integration, making higher self your default. This is the most important practice. Everything I've given you works, but only if you do it consistently. The lower self's programming is strong because it's been reinforced for decades. Creating new neural pathways requires repetition. Here's your daily integration practice starting tomorrow. Morning, 5 minutes. Wake up and immediately do the invocation before checking your phone. Set an intention to operate from higher self today. Do 3 minutes of heart coherence breathing. Midday, 3 minutes. Sacred pause before lunch. Witness practice. Observe your mental and emotional state without judgment. Reset your intention. Evening, 7 minutes. Review the day. When did you operate from higher self versus lower self? No judgment, just observation. Do the death meditation variation. Did I live today like it mattered? Before sleep, 5 minutes. Heart coherence breathing. Gratitude practice. Set the intention to access higher self in your dreams. That's 20 minutes total, less time than you spend scrolling social media. But these 20 minutes, done consistently, will reprogram your consciousness more effectively than anything else you could do. The ancient mystery schools required daily practice because they understood. The journey from lower self to higher self isn't a one-time event. It's a continuous choice. Every moment, you're either strengthening the lower self's patterns or building the higher self's pathways. Now let me tell you the truth about what happens next. You're going to try some of these practices. You might have a powerful experience. You might feel connected to your higher self for the first time in years, maybe in your life. You'll think, this is it. I've figured it out. I'm done with the lower self. And then tomorrow, or next week, you're going to fall back into old patterns. You'll get triggered and react. You'll make a decision from fear. You'll waste an hour on your phone. You'll feel like you failed. Like it didn't work. Like you're back where you started. This is the most critical part. That's not failure. That's part of the process. The ancient diagram doesn't show a straight line from lower self to higher self. It shows a spiral, a back and forth journey. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. The alchemists called it solve et coagula, dissolve and reconstitute. You must break down the old identity before you can build the new one. And that breaking down is uncomfortable, confusing, and often feels like you're getting worse before you get better. Here are the specific obstacles you'll face and how to overcome them. Obstacle 1. The lower self's last stand. When you start accessing your higher self consistently, your lower self will fight back. Hard. It will create crisis, drama, distraction. It will convince you that you're deluded, that this spiritual stuff is nonsense, that you should just go back to your comfortable misery. Psychologists call this extinction burst. When a behavior pattern is being eliminated, it temporarily intensifies before it dies. The lower self knows it's losing control, and it will do everything to reassert dominance. How to overcome? Expect this. When the resistance comes, recognize it for what it is, proof that you're making progress. The stronger the resistance, the closer you are to breakthrough. Don't fight it, observe it. Say, there's the lower self trying to maintain control. Interesting. Obstacle 2, the comfort zone contraction. Your nervous system is addicted to familiar patterns, even painful ones. When you start operating from higher self, everything feels uncertain, new, unsafe. Your nervous system will create anxiety to pull you back to what's familiar. How to overcome? Small, consistent steps. Don't try to revolutionize your entire life overnight. That triggers too much resistance. Instead, practice one technique daily. Build the new neural pathways gradually. Let your nervous system slowly adjust to higher self as the new normal. Obstacle 3. The social pressure. When you start changing, the people around you will unconsciously try to pull you back to who you were. They're not being malicious. They're uncomfortable with change. Your old identity was predictable, comfortable for them. Your transformation threatens their worldview. How to overcome? Don't announce your transformation. Don't try to convince anyone. Just change, quietly, consistently. The people aligned with your higher self will appear. The ones attached to your lower self will fade away. This is natural, necessary. Obstacle 4. The progress plateau. There will be periods where you practice diligently and nothing seems to happen. No insights, no breakthroughs, no obvious progress. This is when most people quit. How to overcome? Trust the process. The ancient masters said spiritual growth is like bamboo. It can be underground for years with no visible growth, building a massive root system. Then suddenly, it shoots up 6 feet in 6 weeks. Your practices are building the root system. The visible growth will come. Obstacle 5. The spiritual ego trap. This is subtle and dangerous. Your lower self can co-opt the spiritual journey and turn it into another form of ego building. You start thinking you're more evolved than others, more awakened, special, chosen. How to overcome? The higher self has no need to be superior. If you find yourself judging others for being asleep or unawakened, that's your lower self wearing a spiritual costume. True higher self connection creates compassion, not superiority. Humility, not arrogance. Let me paint you a picture of what life looks like when you're consistently operating from your higher self. Because this isn't just about feeling better. This is about becoming someone completely different, someone who experiences reality in a fundamentally new way. Decision-making transforms. From the lower self, decisions are torture, endless analysis, fear of making the wrong choice, regret about past decisions, anxiety about future outcomes. You're paralyzed by options, terrified of consequences. From the higher self, decisions become clear. You access intuition that cuts through mental noise. You know what's aligned with your deepest truth. You make choices from wisdom rather than fear. And when outcomes don't match expectations, you don't collapse into regret. You adapt, learn, and move forward. Relationships transform. From the lower self, relationships are transactions. What can I get? How can I be validated? Am I better than them? Are they judging me? There's constant comparison, competition, fear of abandonment, need for approval. From the higher self, relationships become connections. You see people as consciousness having different experiences, not as objects that serve your ego. You can love without attachment. You can set boundaries without guilt. You can let go without bitterness. You attract people aligned with your authentic self, rather than the persona you are performing. Work transforms. From the lower self, work is suffering, something you have to do to survive. Your worth is tied to productivity. Your identity is your job title. Failure feels like death. Success feels empty. From the higher self, work becomes expression. You align your time and energy with your actual values and gifts. You create from inspiration rather than obligation. Success and failure are just feedback, not judgments on your worth. You can put in effort without attachment to outcome. Money transforms. From the lower self, money is survival, status, security. Never enough, always anxiety, spending to fill emptiness, hoarding from fear, comparing your financial worth to others. From the higher self, money becomes energy, a tool. You use it consciously. Spend it in alignment with your values. Save it without anxiety. Give it without depletion. Your worth isn't tied to your bank account. You can have abundance or scarcity without it defining your identity. Time transforms. From the lower self, time is the enemy. Never enough, always running out, trapped between regret about the past and anxiety about the future. wasting the present worrying about both. From the higher self, you inhabit the present. The only moment that actually exists, past and future, exist only as thoughts in this moment. You can plan without anxiety. You can remember without regret. You're here, now, fully alive. Health transforms. From the lower self, your body's either an object to be optimized or a failing machine that betrays you. Health is vanity or fear. Exercise is punishment or performance. From the higher self, your body is the temple of consciousness. You care for it with respect, not obsession. You listen to its wisdom. You treat it well because it's the vehicle for your experience, not because of how it looks or how long it lasts. Purpose transforms. From the lower self, purpose is either non-existent, life is meaningless, we're all going to die anyway, or it's external. I need to find my purpose, discover my mission, figure out what I'm supposed to do. From the higher self, purpose emerges naturally. It's not something you find, it's something you embody. You become a channel for consciousness to express itself through your unique configuration of gifts, experiences, and circumstances. You're not searching for meaning, you're creating it with every authentic choice. Death transforms. From the lower self, death is the ultimate terror. The end, the void. Everything you've built, accumulated, achieved, gone, meaningless. From the higher self, death is transition. The ego dies, but consciousness continues. You're not your story, your name, your body. You're the awareness that inhabited them. And whether that awareness continues beyond physical death or not, you've lived fully in the time you had. No regrets, no unfinished business, complete. This is what the ancient diagram promises. This is what every mystery school, every enlightenment tradition, every consciousness practice points toward. Not escape from reality, full presence in it. Not transcendence of the human experience, complete embodiment of it. Not becoming something other than human, becoming fully human for the first time. You now have the map, the diagram, the practices, everything you need to begin the journey from lower self to higher self tonight. Not someday. Not when you have more time, more knowledge, more preparation. Tonight. But here's the final truth. None of this matters if you don't actually do it. You can watch this video, you can feel inspired, you can tell yourself you'll start tomorrow, and then tomorrow comes and the lower self pulls you back into the familiar patterns, the comfortable suffering, the slow death of potential unfulfilled. The ancient masters knew this. That's why they created initiation rituals, why they required commitments, why they built entire lives around the practices. Because knowing the path and walking the path are completely different things. So I'm going to ask you to make a choice right now. Not tomorrow. Not when you feel ready. Right now. Choose one practice from this video. Just one. Commit to doing it tonight before you go to sleep. Set a reminder on your phone. Put a note on your mirror. Tell someone you trust. Make it real. That's the first step. That's how you begin crossing the threshold from lower self to higher self. One practice, one day, one choice at a time. And here's what I know. If you do this, if you actually commit to the practices rather than just consuming the information, your life will transform. Not because I said so, not because some ancient text promised it, but because you'll experience it directly. Your higher self is waiting. It's been waiting your entire life, buried under conditioning, suppressed by fear, ignored in the noise. But it's there, eternal, powerful, yours. The diagram has shown you the way. The practices have given you the method. The only question left is, are you ready to begin? If this video gave you the map you've been searching for, share it with someone who needs it. The ancient knowledge was never meant to be hoarded, it was meant to be transmitted. Teacher to student, awakened to awakening. Generation to generation. Comment below which practice you're committing to tonight. That declaration matters. It makes it real. It creates accountability. It signals to your nervous system, this is happening. And remember, you are not the voice of fear in your head. You are not your past. You are not your conditioning. You are the higher self that has always existed beneath the noise. You are consciousness itself, temporarily inhabiting a human form, and you have the power to choose which level of consciousness you operate from. The lower self keeps you small, safe, suffering. The higher self sets you free. Choose.